Hello, I'm Sora Luxon, and this is Hermetic Principle number 4, the principle of polarity. All opposites reconcile, all things are dual. Everything has two poles, everything holds its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature and only differ in degree. Understanding polarity gives you access to the obvious choice of how you decide to view your own reality. This is one of the reasons why, in many occult traditions, we use middle way or middle pillar exercises to depolarize a beginning initiate for 6 months to a year so that they can really start to be ready to come from a position of strength, to see things from an equal and unbiased and centered position. In general terms, you can choose to see things in the light or choose to see them as coming from the dark. That's neither good nor bad. It's just two ways of seeing the same thing. Your life can be perceived from a positive or a negative stance, as can any situation, scenario, or thing. You can live with open love, sincerity, truth, honesty, for instance, or you can live behind ignorance, in judgmentalness, and full of hate. You can choose to have positive or negative attitudes. Even an emotion, as simple as, say, worry, can be perceived and felt within the body and mind as a negative attack, creating stress and anxiety, chemical responses, which are going to, in some individuals, have the power to freeze them into inaction. It can make people ill. But that same worry can be perceived and felt within the mind and body of other individuals as a bright and focusing motivator. Someone who's into competition uses worry. When they get worried, someone's pulling ahead of them in a race, right? It's worry that's going to give them that warm, invigorated sense of power that's going to inspire and impel them to action so that they can get to that finish line first. Fear, worry in this scenario, can then be something disliked that you flee from that freezes you up, or it can be something that's appreciated and embraced that frees you up, that gives you the challenge necessary to grow. It's two sides of the same coin. The law of polarity is the simplest measure for those who understand its applications to control those who do not understand its applications. The symbolic pillars, so often referred to in different occult traditions, are a representation of this law. On the Kabbalic tree of life, you see the polarity columns. They're called the pillars of severity and mercy. In Masonic traditions, you'll see the columns represented under the honor titles of Jachin Boaz. In other traditions, the pillars of polarity describe themselves by other means. The symbolism will be there. It's always there. The Hermetic principle of polarity and its duality is in everything. Left, right, on, off, dark, light, 0, 1. That's for the computer coders out there. Yes, no, hot, cold, positive, negative. There are two sides, and both are playing off of each other. They seem to be opposite, but they aren't opposite things. They are the same thing, just in different degrees. People who have trained themselves in the fundamental realities of polarity and its uses can apply this principle very simply, very, very simply, to create massive effects. You can see polarity manipulating the unaware constantly and consistently every day, somewhere in your life. Whether it's in religion, in politics, in media, polarity will be there, creating division in those who are polarized to one side or another, or it will be there creating unity in a subset of a group that's polarized to one side or another. There are a lot of well-meaning people that will, in trying to teach as practitioners of the great art, they'll make the claim that the law of polarity can be best used by focusing on only the positive, like only focusing on the optimistic in life or things and approaching everything that way. But that doesn't ring as common sense for the obvious reason you've likely already worked out from how I phrased it. They believe that and they claim that because it's attractive. That's a very attractive claim to make. But only focusing on the positive can be just as dangerous or devious as only focusing on the negative side of any spectrum, right? It doesn't matter if you're focusing on the negative or the positive. If you're focusing on one and only one to the exclusion of perspective from the other, then you're polarized and you're now going to make mistakes, not see things, or be easy to maneuver and exploit. Someone who's super, super optimistic and approaches everything all the time from some positive outlook and tells you should do the same. I mean, you can walk into 4 lanes of oncoming traffic with a positive outlook. You're still going to get hit by a car, right? That's the problem with making that kind of a claim. The car is not going to not hit you because you're so optimistic that it won't happen. It's still going to hit you. On the other side of that equation is standing in the middle of 4 lanes of oncoming traffic, knowing you're going to get hit by a car and being negative about it, and knowing that no matter what one of those cars is going to hit you is going to have its own problems, right? So neither one makes a great deal of sense. It's about balancing between the positive and the negative. All that's needed to manipulate a polarized person, whether negative or positive, doesn't matter. All that's needed to manipulate them is the willed introduction of either an attracting or an opposing force. And by that, you can produce whatever reactive outcome you're looking for in that individual. If your boat is sinking, for instance, let's say you're in a boat and you're thinking, I'm going to drown no matter what, then you're never going to notice the lifesaver that you could use to help and save yourself. But if you're staring at the sky, believing that no matter what, a giant bird is definitely going to come save you, then you're also not going to take the time to notice the lifesaver that you could have used to help yourself or save yourself. Either way, you drown while never noticing the force that originally harpooned your boat. You've been too busy in your reaction states to see the real weapons that are being employed, sometimes against you. And you've certainly been too busy to take them for yourself, where you could have safely stored them out of reach of the boat in the first place. We all know polarized people. They adore talking, whether a lot or a little. Sometimes it's a lot. But they adore talking about their own political views, their own religious views, their own opinions, their own generation, their own viewpoint. Whatever the dogma, doctrine is, they have an opinion on it. It's right. They're going to talk about it. Sometimes they're going to assume and judge you immediately if you don't say anything for not holding it. They don't grasp the value of silence. Generally, they also seem to be very hard or incapable of listening or learning how to do the listening that would be required to gain information that they could then use to their own benefit. Being polarized is when you aren't being calm and rational. Sometimes that expresses itself in very obvious ways. If someone's very angry or very upset or they're yelling very loudly, right? That's a very obvious, outward, sometimes physical expression of a polarized state, and that is a polarized state. But sometimes people can be very good of maintaining an outward sense of calm or, this outward sense of decorum as if they're not polarized, while internally they really are still in a heightened and polarized state. So you have to be aware of that. It's not always obvious. But the way you can tell whether you or someone else is being polarized or functioning from a polarized state of self or state of mind, it's when you think you're right and everything else is wrong, right? Or when someone else feels that way or acts that way. Or it's those moments when you're convinced that what someone else is doing is wrong, no matter what, to the exclusion of all other possibilities or scenarios. You're not even thinking of them. You have no room for those perspectives. That's also being polarized. That's how you can tell. These are generally people who are going to react, whether you can see it or not, they're going to react in some way to every comment or opinion that they feel opposes them or their own opinions. See, there's that word oppose, opposition, duality, over and over again. I've seen highly polarized people scan an internet feed, look at their own cell phone and scan their own cell phone feed, say on Twitter, read an internet comment from a complete stranger, and then become immediately and forcefully energized in a reactionary state and go and comment themselves with their own opinions. And now there's some battle being waged on the internet with others, which I would call false or illusory, except for the very real energetic effects and consequences it's having on the person engaged in it, wasting their time on it, or more aptly, that person being manipulated and controlled by it. Because when you're reacting to that sort of thing, then that stranger on Twitter is now manipulating and controlling you. You've given them that. You know what I'm talking about here, probably. Common sense and a depolarized, secure, and individuated consciousness that's aware of its own worth and validity, and that has sometimes a formalized awareness of this hermetic law of polarity, isn't ever going to have time for any of that nonsense. It isn't going to engage in that behavior. As someone who's depolarized is the type of person who isn't online arguing with other people, right? They see that for what it is and they don't have time for it. I think it was Mark Twain. It might have been Mark Twain. I'm not totally sure. But there's this wonderful quote: never argue with idiots. They'll only drag you down to their level and then beat you with experience. I love that quote. That is one of the best descriptions I've ever seen of polarity. The point there is, no, you don't have to have an opinion. And if you do not have to waste your time and energy offering it unasked as a reaction to someone else's opinion. And if you are doing that, then you're making that choice to waste your energy and time. And you can be sure that whatever you're doing or saying is not going to have any effect whatsoever, because whoever you're arguing with is just as uselessly polarized as you yourself are choosing to be when you behave that way. You're not going to convince them of anything. An occultist of useful caliber remains depolarized when and as much as we can. Because of those reasons, we control or prefer to control or be in control rather than being controlled. And that really does have to do with controlling the self instead of letting some other force, by provoking your polarized reaction, to have control over yourself. If you have a strong, absolute truth only sort of opinion, or an absolutist type of belief system in place about something, then you are polarized on that subject. And so you are going to be easy for someone who understands this law, this principle, to control. Again, we've all seen this, right? There's no easier way to force a polarized person into a froth at the mouth frenzy than to tell them how wrong they are. And there is no easier way to gain influence over a polarized person by their unearned and uninformed trust and commiseration than to tell them how right they are and how much you agree with them. Becoming or being depolarized, positive or negative, see, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're contradicting someone and making them angrier or agreeing with someone to gain their confidence. Both of those are manipulations. Both of those are functions of polarity. Being depolarized is the means by which you can free yourself from the control and manipulation of those external sources. The informed use this principle to their own advantage so much, so often, because it's one of the easiest methods to employ. Many, if not most people, are walking around reacting to things instead of willfully choosing actions, right? They're reacting instead of acting. Many people generally wander through every day, either agreeing or disagreeing with just about everything that they come across in one way or another. That makes them mechanisms by which this Hermetic principle operates. Now, that's not good or bad. It just means that they're the mechanism it's operating on, rather than the operator of the principle, right? They're being used by this law rather than using it. Polarity, in and of itself, isn't a bad thing. It isn't either good or bad. It simply is. But being highly polarized so that you're easy for other people to control is generally going to be a bad thing if you want to pursue your own will, or if you want to pursue your own courses of action with any type of self-aware freedom. You actually don't have to go around agreeing and disagreeing with everything. By knowing that the pillars of polarity are the same, but simply in different degrees of position, you can move between them. You can choose to see both for what they are. Grounding, by means of different magical ritual or ceremony, different breathing and meditating techniques, right? Yogic techniques, some of the practices that I've gone over in my magic lessons that I've been putting out. These are some examples of the ways that you can begin to work towards becoming depolarized, if you want to, so that you can use the principle instead of being used by it, because that is what grounding does. It gives you a way to start working with the law of polarity. When you're grounding, you're depolarizing. And when you're depolarized, when you're in the middle of the pillars, you can see them, you can choose between them. You're not easy to control or manipulate. You're coming from a centered position of strength. All advanced, low and high magics are on the 7 Hermetic principles. They rely on them. They come from them. They're based on them. Everything is going to rely on the 7 Hermetic principles, no matter what style or type of magic you're doing. How well it works will be a reflection of how in step it is with your knowledge and application of the principles. Until next time.